clicker. Oh, wow, it's great to be on stage. It's been a year and a half since I stood on a stage, so this is pretty exciting. I'm particularly excited for this talk because this is a talk I could only do in front of a room full of product marketers, so we see how it goes. So my background is, I actually started in product marketing. I spent 25 years of my career being a repeat vice president of marketing. Sometimes I'm running product too. But at my core, I feel like a product marketer. And so at the beginning of my career, that was kind of annoying, like, because I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. And at the beginning, they'd say, well, what kind of marketer are you? I'd say, I'm a product marketer. And then people would say, so what's that? And I'm so old that we used to have this thing. Does anybody remember this? This is the pragmatic marketing framework. And so there were these folks, and they did product training. And they had all these little boxes, and every little box on here represented something that product people do. And then they would circle them. And so, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this blue circle, and it says, that's what product marketers do. And like, few things in my life has pissed me off as much as that circle. Like look at the positioning didn't even make it in. Didn't even make it in. And what did make it in, and all these things are cut equal weight. Like, positioning's the same as, like, there's this thing here, look at this thing. Special calls. I'm like, which calls are not special, John? What is it about, and what is that, special calls? But look, it's in there, we're doing those. So this thing used to drive me crazy. We got better things now. So I actually like this one quite a bit. This is particularly useful if you're trying to impress somebody, like your boss, or you're in an interview, and you're like, look at all this shit that I do. There's so much stuff here. And this is a lot better than the other one in that it actually makes sense, and all of these things I do, unlike the other one, which, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there I don't even know what to do. But if I'm not trying to impress my boss about the scope of, you know, what I'm capable and all the rest of it, and I'm just sitting around with a bunch of product marketers, and I had to say, well, what do we actually do? I actually have a bit of a hot take on this, and I think there's two things. This is a little B2B centric, but I think there's kind of at the nut of what we do, the foundation of all that stuff on that wheel are these two things, and that's it. So I'm going to try to make a case for that. You tell me how I'm doing. So here's the two things: positioning, and it's the sales narrative. So I'm going to start with positioning. Like, positioning's kind of my jam. This is my definition of positioning. Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering something that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. It's a terrible definition, I admit it. I wrote this, and it's kind of a mouthful. But the reason it's a mouthful is because positioning is composed of a bunch of stuff. So it isn't just one thing. It's actually 5 component things. Like, typically we can break positioning down into these 5 things. The first one is competitive alternatives. If we didn't exist, what would a customer do? The second one is differentiated capabilities. So what do we got that the competitors don't have? Then there's differentiated value, super important. We're product marketers, we get that. So what's the value that we can deliver for customers that nobody else can? And then what customers are we talking about here? So I've got my target customer segments. And then the last one's market category. Like, are we a database or a business intelligence tool? Like, what market do we actually intend to win here? These are the 5 things. If you think about it, everything we do in marketing and sales requires these 5 things as an input. So if you come to me and you say, April, we got to make some ad campaign, I'm going to go, awesome. Who's it for? And like, what's the value we're trying to communicate? Who do we compete against, and how do we win? I got to answer all these things. It works the same in sales. If I go to sales and say, oh, we're going to do outbound calling campaign, sales team is going to be like, okay, so who's the target? Who do we compete with? How do we win? I need all this stuff. I can't do anything until I have this stuff defined. I'm going to give you an example. My first ever job, I got a job, I get hired as the first product marketer, my first ever job, and I'm working at a startup, and, you know, because I'm new, they don't give me the good product, they give me the crap product. So they've got this product that's kind of failing, and my first assignment is, look, April, we've been trying to sell this thing for 6 months, and we're selling it for $100 a pop off the website. We've been trying to sell it for 6 months, we've sold 200 copies, not exactly paying your salary. So what we'd like you to do is call these folks and like get a read on how mad they're gonna be when we turn it off. So this is my first job. So I'm calling, I spend a month, I actually managed to get 100 of these people on the phone. And so every conversation goes like this, or at least the first 20 go like this. I get on the phone, I'm like, hi, I'm April. I'm calling from this company, Whatcom, and I want to ask you about your experience with this product, Whatcom SQL. And the guy on the end will go, don't have that. No, we actually don't have that product. And I'm like, well, yeah, actually I got a spreadsheet here and it says on January 29th, you purchased it off our website. Oh yeah, that thing, yeah. We messed around with that for like 10 minutes or something, and then we chucked it out. Now this thing was originally conceived as desktop productivity software. So you know what we thought it was? It was like, do you remember Microsoft Access? Does anybody still use that? It was like Access Killer. So what this thing did, now you gotta think this is like the olden days. What this thing did was, it was like Access, except you could actually, it understood SQL. You write structured query language queries in it. So like, think of like a spreadsheet with SQL power. And we were super geeky, techie people. And we're like, everybody wants one of those, right? And we went out and we surveyed customers, and we were selling compilers at the time. We surveyed customers, everyone like, yeah, that sounds good. That, SQL powered spreadsheet thing, amazing. We put it up, of course, the end of the story is we only sold 200 copies. So I'm called, so everybody, the people that bought it, they bought it and mucked around with it for a week, and then they were like, I actually have a use for this thing, and then they didn't use it anymore. So I do 20 of these calls, and I'm like, well, we're gonna shut this off, this is gonna be too sad. And then I get number 21. So number 21, I get the guy on the phone, and I'm like, hi, I'm April, I'm calling from this thing. And the guy's like, oh my God, your product changed my life. Got me a promotion, it's amazing. And he's on this big rant, and I'm like, shit, I'm gonna tell this guy I'm gonna turn it off, right? And then I'm like, so what are you doing with it? And he says, it's amazing. So we got sales reps out in the field, but we've got our order system runs on this big Oracle database at the headquarters. So the people out in the field, what they're actually doing before you was they're writing stuff down on paper or taking notes, and then they come back and they put the order in, and they make mistakes or they miss stuff. And then sometimes we can't even price it until we get to the order thing. And then they got to go back and forth. And now I wrote this little app, put your thing underneath it, because it's got SQL in it. They just put it in the laptop, they come back, they plug in, it syncs up with the Oracle database. It's like magic, it's fantastic. And I'm like, yeah, weirdo. That's not what we built that thing for at all. And I'm like, okay, I got one guy who's gonna be kind of upset. I don't break it to him that we're about to kill it. And I'm like, okay, so we got one guy. I do another 20 calls. We have that thing, what? And then I do another one where the guy's really excited. He says, your product absolutely changed the way we do field service. So we have these ruggedized devices. We can now put this thing that you've got on there, go out, do stuff in the field, come back, sync with the Oracle database. I do 100 calls. I get 92 don't even know they have the thing, and I got 8 that are like, you will pry it from my cold, dead fingers. So then I go, I'm junior, I go to the meeting with the executive team, and I'm like, okay, good news and bad news, depending on how you feel about things. So the good news is, 92% of the people, we're gonna shut this off, they don't even care. We got 8 that are like, they're not gonna be happy, but there's only 8 of them. And this sparked a conversation like, maybe we could reposition as that. Maybe what we actually are is not desktop productivity software. Maybe what we are is an embeddable database for mobile devices. Now, think about that. Is that just a little change in the message? No, that's a change in everything. That's like a whole new business. We were selling the thing $100 a pop off the website. Now I'm gonna sell it, you're gonna have one of these for everybody on your sales team or everybody on your field. Like, I'm gonna sell you packages of 100 of these or packages of 1,000. Pricing's gonna totally change. I need salespeople now to do these deals. We didn't have this. So we decided we were gonna take a run at it. We repositioned the thing, we hired a sales rep. The thing sold like, we closed a deal. The first week we had a sales rep, we closed the deal with Xerox for 10,000 copies. The 6 months previous, we had sold 200. So this was good. anyways, we ended up getting acquired by a big database company. That little product, which eventually got renamed as iAnywhere, went on to do hundreds of millions of revenue. It still exists. It's part of SAP now, although I heard they're end-of-lifing it this year. But that was 25 years ago. This thing, over its lifetime has earned more than $1 billion. We almost killed it because we didn't know what it was. If we think about the positioning on that, we understood what our special feature was. What we really didn't understand was the value, and we didn't understand who really cared a lot about that value. So if positioning is so important, how do we actually do it? This is a question that vexed me for a long time. In the early part of my career, I thought, well, this is so important. We just kind of mucked around and did the repositioning, but how should we have known? Like, maybe we should have known earlier that we were a embeddable database for mobile devices and not a fancy spreadsheet. And so I went and took a bunch of courses on this and read a bunch of books, and I was super disappointed. Like, the closest thing I ever got to a methodology for positioning was this thing. And when I was first introduced to this, I went and did a class at a university, and the guy got in and said, today we're going to talk about positioning. This is how we do it. It's like Mad Lib's fill in the blanks thing. We are a blank that does blank, unlike blankety blank blank. And I'm sitting at the back going, okay, but like one of those blanks says market category, and we didn't know what our market category was. Like, how do you know what the right answer is for that blank? And so the professor outlines this thing, and then he says, that's it, we're done. Positioning class is done. We're moving on to the next thing. And I'm like, no. And I'm at the back, I got my hand up. I'm like, wait, hold up. And I give him the whole story, like we had just done this reposition. Give him the whole story. We thought it was a spreadsheet. Turns out it's a embeddable database for mobile devices. These are really different market categories. You got a blank there that says market category. How do I know I got the right one? And you know what he told me? He said, he did me the whole professor thing. He got his glasses on, put his glasses down. Who said that? And look at me, it's me. How do you know? And he says, trust me, April, you'll just know. And I was like, I see you. I know what that is. That's what smart people say when they have no freaking clue. And so at that point, I was like, oh God, we don't actually have a methodology to do this super important thing that we got to do all the time with every product. Like, wow. So I thought, well, maybe, I don't know. At this point, I've repositioned 3 products, so I think I'm hot stuff. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I can figure this out. So the first thing I thought was, we'll treat this like an engineering problem. I'm going to break it into pieces, solve for the component pieces, snatch them together, and voila, good positioning. So breaking it into pieces is pretty easy because we agree on what the component pieces are. So these are the pieces, like competitive alternatives, differentiated capabilities, differentiated value, what customer segments we're going after, market category. These are the 5 things. So I thought, well, all I got to do is get the best answer for each of those, put all this stuff together, that's good. Now, the first thing you notice, though, when you break it apart like that, is everything has a relationship to everything else. That's part of why this is tricky. So if I look at like differentiated value, the unique value that my product can enable for customers is completely dependent on what? My unique capabilities. Like, that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from anywhere else. We don't get to just make it up. It comes from there. But my unique capabilities are only unique when I compare them to a competitive alternative. So crap, those things are all related. And then customer segments. My definition of a best fit customer, these are the customers that actually really care a lot about my value. So I can't figure out one without figuring out the other. The last one's market category. It's a little more esoteric, but our best market category, you can think of it as like the context we position our product in such that this value kind of makes sense to these people. So if everything relates to everything else, where do I start? And for 2 years, and it's actually not a joke, for 2 years, I decided there was no natural starting point here. What we did, we'd start somewhere, and let's start with capabilities, because we love that in tech, and we'll work our way around. We'll get candidate positioning. We'll go out in the market, and we test it. If it works, great, we run with it. If it fails, we come back, and we work around the wheel again. And for 2 years, I feared for my job, because if you do this, the great thing is, if you get it right the first time, everybody's happy, you're a hero. If you get it wrong wrong the first time, you got to come back and do another iteration, then everybody's grumpy. They're like, come on, VP marketing, this has been a hot minute already. And you're like, no, I'm iterating through this thing again. And they're like, whew, and every day I'm worried about getting fired. It's a long story how I broke out of this, but the short version of it is I got really into jobs to be done. And I started thinking about what's the relationship between jobs to be done and this stuff. And the short version of this story is I realized you actually got to do it in a certain order. You have to start with competitive alternatives. If you don't, what you'll get is positioning that sounds good in the office, but it doesn't win out in the market because it's not sufficiently differentiated. So we start with this idea of, if I didn't exist, what would customers do? And that includes things like a spreadsheet or hiring an intern or whatever, plus the things that land on a short list with you. So this is what I got to beat in order to win a deal. And then you could say, well, what have I got that those things don't have? That gives me unique capabilities. Then I can go down that list of capabilities, map it to value, and say, so what? I got this capability, so what? Why does the customer care? Then I can figure that out. Once I have that, then I can say, well, here's my value themes. What kind of customers actually care a lot about that? Or what is the characteristic of a target account that makes them care about that? That's going to get me to my segments. And then once I have that, again, I got market category. I'm like, okay, I got this value. I got these people. Am I a database or a spreadsheet? Am I, what am I? What's the market I intend to win? Let me give you an example of this. So this is a company I worked with a couple of years ago. They're called Level Jump. They're doing sales enablement world over there. They're in that space. It sucks. There's so many companies in that space. It's terrible. So these guys are brand new. They're competing against all these other folks. It's a dogfight, this market. So we went through that process. We're like, well, what are the alternatives to what you do? Well, you could use just, Google Drive, shared drive. A lot of people use that. If you're a really small company, you just put the sales stuff on the drive, it's fine. Or you're getting a little more sophisticated. There's a whole bunch of these solutions that are basically CMSs. It's just a nice way to put something on a shared place, do a little version control, whatever. They're basically a CMS. And then if you get really sophisticated, you got an LMS, which is like a learning management system, and I can make courses, and I can track who took the course, and how far are you through, whatever. So then what's different about these guys? The only differentiator these guys really have is that their stuff is built native on Salesforce, nobody else's is. So, well, so what? What's the value of that? Well, we spent a lot of time talking about this. Like, there's all these little points of value, like, the sales rep doesn't have to log into another system, or, the training gets delivered when they're in the sales tool. And that actually isn't that compelling. The big compelling thing that you have here is that the data is the same. It's inside Salesforce. So what it means is you can track the results of your sales enablement program using sales data. Now I got something. The value of that is I can prove the impact. So I'm not just doing training for training's sake. Like, why are we doing the training in the first place? I'm trying to move sales. I'm trying to get to first deal faster. I'm trying to get to quota faster. So that's the differentiated value. Then you say, well, who cares a lot about that value? Well, if you're not hiring a lot of new sales reps and doing a lot of onboarding, then you don't care about this. What's the market they intend to win? Sales enablement's actually okay, but they kind of did this neat trick where it's like it's outcome-based sales enablement. It's sales enablement that drives results. We'll come back to this example. Anyways, if you want to go right down the positioning rat hole, I wrote a book on it. It's everything I know about positioning, whatever. So that's big one, positioning. Big two, sales narrative. So here's me. We get the positioning right. We go through this exercise, positioning, and we know exactly how we win in the market. We know what our differentiated value is. We know who we're going after. It's fantastic. And like, everything's going good. We're driving a lot of leads. Everything's going good at the front of the pipeline. This is fantastic. And the goal of this stuff is to sell, right? We need to sell stuff. So I'm like, gee, I wonder how it's going over in sales. And then I walk over to sales, and I'm like, oh God, this is terrible. They're not doing any positioning at all over there. In fact, most of the, and this is true even for the companies I work with now, most sales teams, you go in and the prospect's on the thing, and the sales team says, so tell me about your problems. It's like therapy. They're like, tell me about your problems. And they'll say, well, I've got this problem and that problem. They say, it doesn't matter what they say. Fantastic, we can solve that. Let me log in. I'm going to give you a demo, and I'll give you a feature tour. That's it, feature tour. And I'm like, well, this sucks. We just spent all this time on this positioning, and these guys, they're not doing any of that. So what we actually need to do is we need to take our positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. Otherwise, what is the freaking point? We're getting it all the way to the 1 yard line, and then these guys are like, tell me your problems. Anyway, think about customers. You're a customer buying, this is particularly true of B2B software. Customers buying your software have never bought software like yours before. Think about it. Like somebody says to, the head of finance wakes up and says, oh, we need a new accounting program. John, go find us one. And John goes, oh God, I've never bought an accounting program before. I don't know who's even in that market. And I start Googling it, and I get all these landscape things, and I go on G2 Crowd, and there's 5,000 things in there. I don't know how to make a short list. I don't know what I care about. I don't know anything, right? They're like, this is a nightmare, you're buying software. And it is no surprise that 4 out of 10 B2B purchase processes ended no decision. And when you dig into this data, the reason they ended no decision, it's not that they didn't like your thing, it's they couldn't even agree on the approach to the problem. So status quo wins, because I don't even know how to narrow this down in a short list, man. Let's just keep using the spreadsheet. There's a bunch of interesting data on what do customers actually want in a sales process, and it turns the number one thing is how to navigate alternatives. They want perspectives on the market. What's that? That's positioning, man. What they actually want their salesperson to do is position your stuff in the overall market. Are we doing that? No, for the most part, we're not. So I'm going to lay this thing on you. So I think a really good sales narrative actually does exactly that. And what it does is it takes your positioning and it translates it into a really compelling story about here's the market, here's all your other choices, and here's where we fit in it. It goes like this. We start with a really deliberate framing of the problem. So I'll get to exactly a couple examples on that. We're a really deliberate framing of the problem. We're not solving just any problem here. We have a particular point of view on this market. We think the problem is like this. There are all these other alternative approaches, and there are pluses and minuses for all different types of customers. But for you, target customer of mine, we actually see a perfect solution looks like this. And then you lean over and go, right? And they're either with you or they're not. If they are, then you go, great, because that's what we built. Here's the value we can deliver. These are the features that enable that value. Here's the proof we can do what we say we can do. Each of these steps maps to your positioning. So the first one, I need insight about the actual goals of my target customers in order to frame that problem specifically enough that I can do this setup bid. The next bit is really just insight into here's the whole market, here's where everybody fits, and here's what they're good and bad at doing. Then I'm going to hit you with here's what a perfect solution should look like. These 3 things are not about my stuff, they're about the market. The last stuff is, well, if I get you here where you're like, yeah, that sounds good, then you go, good, let me show you how we do that. This is rolling down a hill. So let's go back to my level jump example. When I first started working with these folks, if you sat in on a sales call, the sales reps would be in there and they'd be like, so we're here for the demo call. What are you interested in seeing? And the customer would say, well, kind of looking at training software, could you show me the training stuff? And they're like, yeah, training, let's log in. And log in, they get the tour of the thing. And buried down at the very, very, very end of the demo was, okay, here's how we set up training, here's how we do whatever. At the very end, here's how you measure the results. Talk about burying the lead. Their whole differentiator is happening in the last 2 minutes of this demo. Everything else is actually undifferentiated. Anyone can do this. Any other alternative can do all the rest of this stuff. So this is what their website looked like at the time. They did have reach quota faster in here, but they had this consistently drive revenue, accelerated onboarding. It's a smorgasbord of stuff we can do, and it wasn't very focused. Here's what happened after. So after we redid the sales narrative, now what happens is sales rep comes in, they're talking to the head of sales enablement at a fast-growing company. Sales rep comes in and says, hey, head of sales enablement is pretty important, right? Yeah, you know why it's important? It's important because every day your rep's not making quota costs you money. That's the problem. I don't go in and say training, let's talk about training. No, I'm talking about sales onboarding here. Like, why do we give a shit about sales onboarding? We give a shit because every day your reps not making quota actually costs you money, and then they got all this great data. They kill you with the data. $2 million spent on whatever. Every day your reps not making quota. It's terrible, right? You know, you're the head of sales enablement. So let's look at how we're solving this. Well, does a CMS solve this problem? Well, yeah, you can put some stuff in there, make sure they're getting the right stuff. Does an LMS solve this problem? It's a little bit better. I know who took the training and I know who didn't take the training, so that's better. But you know what? None of these things actually help you solve that problem. Do you know if your enablement stuff is working? How do you justify to your boss? Your job, head of sales enablement. Don't you really want, this is my perfect world thing, don't you actually want a sales enablement tool that lets you measure the results with sales data? Right? And at that point, if the head of sales enablement, like, they'd be an idiot not to say right, but if they say, yeah, actually that's what I want, then they're like, great, that's what we do. Let me show it to you. Here we are, this is how we measure the results, here we do all the thing, blah, blah, blah. I give you the proof that I can do it, but I got a bunch of customers that do it, and that's it. So if you look at the new website is really honed in on that. It's outcome-based sales enablement. Prove the revenue impact of your go-to-market readiness. 86% faster time to opportunity, 20% accelerated time to second deal, 50% decreased ramp time. If you want to prove out ROI, level jump's a no-brainer. So this unlocked a lot of growth for them because the positioning is right at the center of the sales story. So this thing grew really fast, and then they just announced a month ago that they got acquired by Salesforce, which would make sense, and now everybody's rich. That's the end of that story. I have 1 minute, so I'm going to do one more example. This is another company I work with, Help Scout. What's neat about Help Scout, they're in the customer service space, so they compete against Zendesk. Zendesk is a really big competition. And what I love about these folks, when we did the positioning, they have this really unique bit of insight into the customers they're selling to are a little bit smaller. And if you look at the way Zendesk or any like help desk software works, they treat customer support like you get treated like a ticket. What they're trying to do is like avoid giving you support. Like they're trying to send you to the knowledge desk. They're trying to get you out of there as fast as possible. These guys are dealing with smaller brands and a lot of direct-to-consumer brands. And so their companies are like, this is actually the only time we get to interact with customers. So we actually see this as an opportunity to really build a deeper relationship with the customer. So the entire product's been architected around that. And so, again, if you look at the way they do a sales narrative, they don't start by saying, hey, you want to get through a volume of tickets, or like, hey, you want to make sure your people in CS aren't overloaded with tickets and too much stuff. It's actually the opposite. They come in and they say, customer support is actually the best way to create a great customer experience. And then they show you all the data on that. So they frame the problem in a very specific way. How do we develop better customer relationships using customer service? And then they do this contrast, like, who do we compete against? We compete against folks like the help desk things, but that's not about relationships. It's about calling you a ticket, for God's sakes. They don't even think you're a person. And then, so, in a perfect world, again, it's my perfect world step, wouldn't you have customer success or customer service platform that actually helped you foster these relationships, right? Customer says right, and then we go down. Anyway, so you look at their website and it's like, simple to start, powerful to grow, proven to build better customer relationships is really the nut of their differentiation. Anyway, that's my thing. So I really think that if you nail these two things, it doesn't mean you don't do the other 5 million things on the wheel of life there. But if you do these two things very well, they're kind of the foundation and everything else flows from that. This is my email and stuff. You can send me an email. And that's it, I'm done. I might actually be over a little bit, and I know there's a break coming up, so if we don't do questions now, you can just hang around after the break and ask me a question face to face. Anyway,
well, let's say thank you to April. Can we put the slider on? We can take a couple of questions here,
sure.
And then we'll go out.
Yeah.
I'm going to cut the break a bit.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so, hi April. How do you think there is a difference between differentiated value and distinctiveness, and why?
Well, maybe they're the same thing. Maybe it's just a definition thing. Like a lot of times when I work with companies and they're talking about distinctiveness, they're actually talking about features, not the why of the features. So I like talking about differentiated value because it really gets at the why. Like, I don't care that the thing is built on Salesforce. What I care about is that, I can measure the results of my sales enablement programs with sales data. So that it's often when people talk about something being distinct, it's actually a really feature-oriented thing as opposed to value. But value is the nut of it. We got to get to value. That's it. Questions answered.
Right,
Wait a minute.
okay, what we're going to do, April, thank you again so much.
Thank you.